Hey everybody, thanks for coming out, spending your time with me, I appreciate it. My name is Jay Blakesberg and I'm a photographer. And I live in San Francisco and I do a lot of video work also, and most of my career has been in the music industry as a photographer. You hear about people all the time saying, God, I want to be a rock photographer, and somehow I pulled it off. So it's been a pretty good ride. So I grew up in New Jersey, and suburban New Jersey, and I went to high school in the 1970s. I went to high school from 75 to 79, classic Dazed and Confused years. And this is in upstate New York, actually. This is my best friend from high school, moved up to upstate New York, and we used to go up there every weekend we could and get wasted. And that's me as a young teenager. That's about 1978. And we would party like any other teenager in the 1970s. We didn't have the internet. We were young, stupid teenagers. And this picture, when I put it on Facebook a couple weeks ago for a Throwback Thursday, got a lot of attention. People really liked the fact that I was smoking marijuana. And then in 1977, my sister took me to my first Grateful Dead concert, and nothing has been the same since. This is me at Englishtown, which was a very famous Grateful Dead concert, Labor Day weekend, 1977. There were 100,000 people that came to this concert. And pretty life-changing experience for me, which we'll get into as time goes on, not because I'm passed out with a bong on my stomach, but just because of the journey that I've taken with that. And yes, what a long, strange trip it has been, and continues to be so. This is my very, very first photograph that was ever published in a magazine, and it was published in Relics magazine, and that is Jorma Kaukonen from the Jefferson Airplane and Hot Tuna. And Hot Tuna had just broken up. This was taken in 1978, and I need a couple dates here. And after, it was a solo concert for Jorma. It was billed as Hot Tuna, but Hot Tuna had just broken up, so Jorma played it solo acoustic. And I was 16 years old, and we drove up with a friend of mine who was a senior in high school, and he had a little Karmann Ghia, you know, those little Volkswagen Karmann Ghias, and me and my friend Nikki, who were about this big back then, sat in the back, and after the concert, we decided we were going to follow Jorma's limo into New York City to meet Jorma, because we were 16 and stupid. And so we followed him in. He stopped in a delicatessen to get some food. I went in there. I had my brother's camera that I had borrowed, and I said, hey, Jorma, how about a picture? And I got this picture, and then I sent it in as a letter to the editor in Relics magazine. Relics is still around today. And they published it with my little story about following Jorma into New York City, and that was my very first photograph that was ever published, but not paid for, as a letter to the editor. Jorma, who still makes music today, is a good friend of mine. We talk and communicate regularly, and I still go shoot him and go to his shows. That's me graduating from high school. So that previous photo was in November of 78. This is in June of 79. I don't know if you can see there, I've got a Grateful Dead Skull and Roses patch on my graduation gown. And then right after high school is over, I was starting to bring my camera to concerts, and this to me is a very iconic photo. This was taken, I believe, in June of 79 at Radio City Music Hall. And this is B.B. King, James Cotton, Muddy Water, and Johnny Winter. These are like, you know, the guys in blues music. And you know, this is, I think out of the roll or two of film that I shot, I think this is the only shot that's really actually in focus and exposed properly. I was still trying to figure it all out. Back then, we didn't have digital cameras, so you actually had to know how to expose film and develop film and whatnot. Another photo that I took a couple months after graduating from high school, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, Madison Square Garden, September 79. This was at the big No Nukes concerts that they did back then. And it's sort of indicative of, you know, how valuable intellectual property is. You know, people say, what do you do for a living? And depending on who you are, I might say, well, I create intellectual property and license it across multiple platforms, which is really what I do, but I do it with photography and video. So Stephen Stills used not this exact shot, but one similar in color for his new box set that just came out 6 months ago or whatever. So here's a photo I took just out of high school in 1979, 35 years ago, that still has value today, you know, as intellectual property. This is me at a Grateful Dead concert in 1980, so I was starting to kind of come out as, you know, a full-blown hippie, and, you know, by 1981, I was, you know, the full-blown, sophisticated, groovy hippie on Grateful Dead tour that I am today. A few years later, I kind of was laying low, wasn't doing much photography. I moved to Olympia, Washington, and I went to the Evergreen State College. And after I graduated from Evergreen in '85, I believe it was, I was back up in Seattle visiting some friends, and I went to this concert, which was the band X. It was actually X and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And this was at the Moore Theater up in Seattle, and I just love this shot because this guy, the stage was really high, you can see from their faces. I mean, this guy, he came crashing down on these people at like from 15 feet in the air. And so shortly after that, I became the house photographer at a nightclub in San Francisco on Haight Street called the I-Beam. The I-Beam doesn't exist anymore. That whole block was knocked down and rebuilt. And this is actually Chris Cornell from Soundgarden stage diving at that show. And this is in 1989 when I think just before Louder Than Love came out. Soundgarden's sound man at the time was my college roommate at Evergreen before that. He actually grew up with a couple of guys from Soundgarden. He has a big recording studio in Seattle to this day that everybody's recorded in. Another shot of Chris Cornell. And then this is the same show, and that's Eric Johnson, who was their tour manager, merch guy at the time, and he's actually Neil Young's tour manager now and has been for the last 12, 15 years. After working for Soundgarden, he started working for Pearl Jam, and then Neil stole him away. Another shot from the I-Beam, just a crowd shot. This concert, the band was called the Godfathers. They were a British band. They had one big hit. I think it was called Love, Work, Taxes, Death, something like that. Something like birth, school, taxes, death. Birth, school, work, death, something like that. Anyway, you know, a lot of craziness at the I-Beam, and I got crushed frequently at that club, but it was, and they only had live music on Monday nights at the I-Beam, which was very odd. And the other nights on the weekends, it was a gay dance club, which was very odd. But they had all sorts of great bands. Butthole Surfers, this is actually at the I-Beam, but it was the I-Beam West. They had did a few shows south of Market in some warehouse that is now some .com or something like that. This is Nirvana, taken up on Haight Street before Dave Grohl was in the band. This is before Nevermind came out, and they were doing an in-store at Rough Trade Records on Haight Street. I invited them back to a photo studio afterwards on their way to Sacramento to do a band portrait, and they got lost and never found it and called me from Sacramento hours later like, sorry, dude, we're not coming. So I never got to do a portrait of Nirvana, unfortunately. This is sort of the beginning of my big break. This is U2 during the filming of Rattle and Hum, and that's me over there with the camera. And this was taken into a mirror. When they were filming Rattle and Hum, they came to the Mission District, and they were touring a bunch of murals, and this is at the Mission Cultural Center. And this guy right here, his name is Rene Castro, and his wife Deborah. Deborah worked at Sammy's Camera in the city, which is now back. It was Pro Camera for a while. And I was friends with her. And this guy, Dave, was friends with Bono and The Edge. And Rene was a famous artist in Chile who was kidnapped and tortured by the government back in the 70s, and then Amnesty International released him, and obviously U2 was big with the whole amnesty thing, and so they came and toured this. And another shot of Bono from visiting in the Mission Culture Center. This is November of 1987. And then a couple days later, they did a free concert in downtown San Francisco, which is in Rattle and Hum. And if you go watch the movie, I'm the guy down front with the Nikon and the mullet. You can't miss me. And but the really important thing about this particular shot is this was my very first assignment for Rolling Stone magazine in print. I've done over 300 assignments for Rolling Stone magazine in print, and this is the shot that ran in Rolling Stone. And I was literally the sound system for this free concert was the Grateful Dead sound system, and so there was a lot of buzz going around in that circle that this was going to happen. And I got a phone call from a friend of mine. He's like, "Free U2 concert, it's happening, you know, today, now, Justin Herman Plaza." And I was putting all my camera stuff together to take Bart into the city, and the phone rang, and it's like, "Hey, Jay, this is Jody Peckman, who's still the photo editor at Rolling Stone. I have your big break for you." And she assigned me to shoot this free concert, and that was my first photo in Rolling Stone magazine. This is the Pixies, also in 1988, going back to the I-Beam again. This is one of the just quick little backstage snapshots that I did flash on camera. And the thing that is so great about it is 3 months ago, the Pixies hired me to do their new publicity photos for their next whole album cycle. So we spent, this was I think in February of this year, just a couple months ago, and we spent 3-4 hours in Alameda. They played the Fox in Oakland the night before, and they were playing in San Jose the next day. And we did all new publicity photos of the Pixies. And I showed them that picture. It's in my book, one of the ones that's out here in the hallway, and they were just blown away. And it's just amazing that it's now 25 years later like that, you know. BAM magazine was a magazine here in the Bay Area for many, many, many years, decades, all through the 70s, all through the 80s. It was a newsprint magazine. They eventually, it stood for Bay Area Music. They eventually did an edition down in LA. They used to have a music awards thing called the BAMMys, the Bay Area Music Awards. That was super fun. This is my first magazine cover that I shot for them. I had been starting to shoot some stuff. I basically walked in, met with the editor and said, I want to shoot covers for you. I'd never shot a magazine cover for you. And this is the first one they did. They assigned me, and this was Camper Van Beethoven, shot down in Santa Cruz. Red Hot Chili Peppers, this was a BAM cover. These next few are all BAM covers. This was actually shot at the Fillmore upstairs in the balcony there. I set up a backdrop. And 1989, just some of my favorite. I mean, these, Flea and Anthony look like babies in these pictures here. But some of my favorite Chili Pepper shots. This is the band Primus. This is my first shoot with Primus. And this is, we're going to do, I think, questions afterwards at the end. So write them down or remember them. So Primus I've had a really super long relationship with, which we'll get into a little bit later in the presentation, but this was my first shoot with them, and it was a BAM cover. Les is really into boating and fishing, and so we met at the dock. This is his boat in San Pablo Bay. I believe that's the actual cover shot they used. I had them ride in their boat, and as Les tells it, he says that I kept telling him to come closer to the dock until he smashed his boat, but I just think it was his bad boat riding, but he blames me. To this day. Another cover with Iggy Pop for BAM Magazine. And, Iggy had this leather jacket on, and I was like, I had 20 minutes with Iggy. And I'm like, will you take the jacket off? He's like, fuck you. And then like 2 minutes later, it's like, okay, fuck it. I'll take the jacket off. So that's how we started, with a jacket and a shirt. Then he took the shirt off with the jacket on a little before, eventually he was bare-chested. Because, Iggy's got that gnarly, you've ever seen a picture of Iggy, he's got that gnarly body. Jellyfish, I don't know if you guys remember Jellyfish, great power pop band. My first photo shoot with Carlos Santana. I've gone on to do a 25-year relationship with him and working with him. Love working with Carlos. Ice-T. For a while there, they decided that they were going to put my name and the writer's name on the cover of BAM every time there was a story. So it would say, written by Steve Stolder, photographs by Jay Blakesberg. And when we did this Ice-T cover, my name was bigger than Ice-T's. And after that issue, they didn't put our names on the cover anymore. Jane's Addiction. This was right before the very first Lollapalooza in 1991. They were doing a short little tour. This was up in Sacramento. And these guys hated each other. I mean, Eric, the bass player in the back, and Dave wouldn't talk to Perry. Everybody talked to the drummer, Stephen Perkins, the guy in the upper right. But the band did not get along at all, and they just were not happy to be doing it. And they were even unhappy. It was an Almost Famous moment. When the cover story came out, it was just Perry on the cover. So do you remember that scene in Almost Famous where like the singer's like in the lead on the t-shirt and everybody else is way in the background? It was like one of those moments, but they were just all super unhappy. And I think Dave Navarro was eating a cookie, and I said, can you put the cookie away? And he goes, fuck you, dude, this is my time, not yours, And so it was like super, super tense. And then that's like something that they ran on the cover. That could have been that one or something similar. Spinal Tap. I got to shoot Spinal Tap. This is a BAM magazine cover. We shot this in the conference room at MCA Records. They were giving away promo material. It's like a Spinal Tap joke. They said, to the record company, we want to do, limited edition calendars, right? They wanted calendars with pictures of them. But the label thought they were saying colander, so they made limited edition colanders. So I still have one. I have like a little metal colander, and it's got a ticket on it, on a chain that says limited edition, 1 of 200 or something like that. It's pretty funny. Cracker, who was the guy from Camper Van Beethoven, another BAM magazine cover. Blind Melon, before Shannon Hoon went off and accidentally overdosed and killed himself. Counting Crows, this was also a big cover for me. This is 1993. And this was their first magazine cover of BAM. But the thing that was great about this particular day is that after I did this shoot, I went up to Mill Valley to David Grisman's house and did a magazine cover with Jerry Garcia and David Grisman for Acoustic Guitar Magazine. So a big day for me to be doing that. Sheryl Crow, I also shot her first magazine cover, which was for BAM. When that big first record came out, the Tuesday Night Music Club, her first single they released was Run Baby Run, if you go back and listen to it. And it did nothing at radio. It was before the next one, which was Leaving Las Vegas, I believe was the name of that song. And they didn't know what to do with her, but they decided to put her on the cover of BAM. She came there, no hair, no makeup, no stylist. Her and her manager, who's still her manager today, he ignored me. We shot for an hour, and that was it, her first magazine cover. Same with Alanis Morissette. This is right before Jagged Little Pill. Actually, Jagged Little Pill had just come out this week, and it sold like 10 copies. This was before she exploded. And so it was a BAM magazine cover, and at the same time, we shot a cover for another magazine called Request. So I got 2 magazine covers out of that same shoot. Third Eye Blind. I have a long-term relationship with these crazy people. Been shooting them since day one. And that's sort of like the wrap up of BAM. I think there's another 10 or 20 magazine covers in there, but I didn't want to bore you anymore. So back to the Grateful Dead, which is, of course, is the life-changing experience. They're not the best at what they do. They're the only ones that do what they do, and it's certainly true. You know, I tapped into the Grateful Dead early on, and I was a hippie on tour. You saw the pictures of me early in the presentation, and I lived a life. You know, we went on tour. We smoked marijuana. We did LSD. We saw a lot of Grateful Dead concerts. We had a lot of fun. This woman here was my girlfriend at the time. And just recently, this photo ran in Rolling Stone magazine about a year ago. They did a special issue on the Grateful Dead, and they wanted to run this photo, which they did, and they called me up and they said, we need some caption info. Do you have any caption info? And I was like, yeah. You know, the girl's name is Tammy. She's from Monterey, California. It was taken on September 6th, I think it was, 1980, in Lewiston, Maine. And her father was a colonel in the Air Force, and we kidnapped her and took her on Grateful Dead tour. You know, a little bit more information than they were expecting. More Deadheads from that show. We lived in hotel rooms, and, you know, this to me was sort of the beginning of what I consider really what I do, which is I do visual anthropology. You know, anthropology, the definition is the study of humankind. And, you know, this was a great subject matter to have a bunch of freaks, you know, to be able to photograph. This is my wife over here on the left. We were not married at the time of this photograph. I met her at a Grateful Dead concert, still married today. And ample opportunities to photograph people having fun, losing their minds at a Grateful Dead concert. And like I said, you know, just a great anthropological study of this culture. And now, you know, this picture was taken in 1986 at the Greek Theater, and I've been posting a lot of this stuff on Facebook, and the response, like I can post a picture of Jerry Garcia on Facebook and get a few thousand views or whatever. I'll put something like this on Facebook and 10,000, 20,000 people will look at it and be freaking out because this stuff is just so classic now that it's 25 years old. Good friend of mine, Jennifer. And people are always saying, why don't you have any pictures of me when you were taking pictures of Deadheads back then? I'm like, because you all thought I worked for the DEA and you all ran away from me when I took my camera out. And all the pictures are people of my friends. These are all the people I was on tour with and I was, you know, hanging out with and eating dinner with and, you know, living in hotel rooms with. And so, you know, those are the people in my photographs. So this was my very first interaction with a Grateful Dead band member. This is Bob Weir and Brent Midland from the Grateful Dead, guitar singer and keyboard player. And this was in May of 1979. I was 17 years old, and I convinced my mother that I was going to drive to Virginia, 6 hours away from New Jersey, with some stranger to go see the Grateful Dead. And she let me go. Go figure. I'm not letting my daughter do that. She's 18. No way. And anyway, so the day after the show in Virginia, there was a big, giant no nukes rally on the front steps of the Capitol. And Joni Mitchell played, Jackson Browne played, bunch of different people. And I was walking around and I found one of those little staff badges on the ground, except it said press. And I walked backstage, and I was backstage. You know, I was 17 years old, and ran into Bob Weir and Brent Midland, who were playing in Baltimore, I think, later that night. And except for the guy I was driving down with from Virginia, he was so drunk after the show in Virginia, he actually totaled his car pulling out of the parking lot, and we hitchhiked to Baltimore. So here I am, 17, hitchhiking to Baltimore, and then hitchhiking home to New Jersey after the show in Baltimore. But, you know, that's just the way we rolled because we had to. More Deadhead stuff. Okay, so this was a Rolling Stone magazine assignment, slightly after that U2 one. Benefit concert that Bill Graham put on. That's Bob Weir, Bill Graham, and Jerry Garcia at the Kaiser, and it was members of the Grateful Dead, Bonnie Raitt, Carlos Santana, and this was maybe my second or third, I think it was my second Rolling Stone magazine assignment. Just some classic shots. This is probably my most iconic shot of Jerry Garcia. And this was photographed for a magazine called The Golden Road, which was a Grateful Dead fanzine that everybody loved. And I shot this up at the Grateful Dead office in San Rafael in 1991. And it was a little tiny office. I mean, literally from like here to that wall. And I had to sit on the desk. And I was like, you know, this close to Jerry. And the publicist was outside. And I started shooting. And I shot for about 15 seconds. He came in and said, okay, you're done. And I'm like, no, you know, and I literally I didn't shoot any medium format, which is a Hasselblad square format, which were those square photos you saw from BAM covers. And I shot like a roll and a half of black and white as fast as I could and about 10 frames in color, and then I was out, and he went off and did the interview. You know, most of these guys, Jerry Garcia, Carlos Santana, Neil Young, people that I've been working with now for 15, 20, 25 years, they've done hundreds of photo shoots, but every time I go to a photo shoot with Neil or Carlos, whoever, like, I want to be brilliant. I need to be, because I'm only as good as my last photograph. Who cares that I shot Jerry Garcia in 1991? The photo editors I'm working with today or art directors, they want to see what I did yesterday. And so I want to do the best photograph I can. They just want to leave and go eat lunch or have a turkey sandwich. They don't really care. They've been there, they've done that, and they've been doing it for their whole career. This is a puppet, Jerry Garcia puppet from a video they were making down in Monterey in 1987, in May of 87. And I'm in this video, Touch of Grey video. If you go on YouTube, you can see me dancing down front again. I'm the guy with the mullet. And all my friends were like, we're going to be in the video. And they ran and got right in the center. And I'm like, I'm going to be over to the left. It's a better angle to photograph. And I'm the one in the video, and none of them are. So. More Grateful Dead. Bob Weir and Rob Wasserman. Bob Weir with the Grateful Dead. This is the first time I got hired by a Grateful Dead member to photograph them. Bob was starting a side project, which was an acoustic duo with Rob Wasserman, and they needed new publicity photos. And so Bob's people called me and hired me. And for a couple of years, I was doing a whole bunch of different stuff with Bob. He did a couple children's books with his sister, and these are like for the jackets and all the publicity photos of Bob. From about 90 to 93, 94 were all stuff that I had shot of him. This was for an ad for that guitar company. And another portrait I did of Bob in 2003, I believe this was, when they were doing a tour. This was a crazy day. I woke up the day before this photo shoot, and I fell down on the ground like with vertigo. I was like all dizzy. And so that day, I had to drive up to the Dead warehouse to scout some locations. And I was like totally spun out, and I drove up to Marin, and I'm in the bushes outside the Grateful Dead offices, throwing up in the bushes, and I'm, drive home, and I'm throwing up. And then the next day I came in, I brought all these extra assistants in case I was going to fall off the ladder, and I did this whole big shoot with the members of the Dead for their 2004 tour. But one of those weird moments. This is one of the portraits I did of Jerry the same day I shot the Counting Crows cover. We call this one the Smoker. This is one of the most bootlegged photos of the Grateful Dead out there. This was on the set of a video that they were filming for Throwing Stones, right across the street in Oakland from where I was living at the time, actually. And I just sort of walked onto the set and pretended I needed to be there and was there all day with them. Way back, I actually took that. So somebody handed them that Happy New Year thing. Somebody wanted it for a New Year's thing. But I took a piece of paper and some rubber cement and a razor blade and covered it and then wrote, "I need a miracle ticket" in handwriting. This is pre-computers. And that photo's been bootlegged everywhere in the world. One of my other photo sessions with Jerry in 1992. This was from the same one as the Counting Crows Day. And of course, because I had all this great stuff on the Grateful Dead, I had to do a book on the Grateful Dead. This is my first book that I published, and this was in 2002. I started working on the contract for this in the summer of 2001, and we signed the contract about a week before 9/11, 2001. And of course, when 9/11 hit, the phone stopped ringing. There was no more business, and this book saved my career, or at least my business, because they gave me some upfront advance and upfront production money. And I had one employee, and he stayed on, and we, produced this book, which came out in 2002. But that gave me the bug to really do another book. And so now we're back to Primus. Another thing that's always been important to me and is being able to work with a band for a long period of time, because it shows that they trust you and they respect what you're doing. But I think, again, from the visual anthropology standpoint, it's a real great study. And so Primus is a band that I've been working with since 1990 on a regular basis. And I did a book on them. After I did my Grateful Dead book, I had a bug. Like, I wanted to do another book, and I proposed this to Les Claypool and Primus, and we co-published it together. Actually, I published it, but we were partners on it. And this was a limited edition book. You could only buy it on the website, their website or my website. It was a $100 book. They were all signed and numbered by me and Les. They come with an 8x10 print. We still have a couple hundred of them left. But it was a very successful book. And, it just goes to show that, if you work with one artist that's another BAM cover, Guitar Player magazine cover. A lot of my stuff I was doing with them was for magazine features. And then, of course, they were hiring me also. Like, here's someone that's comfortable enough to drop their drawers at a photo shoot and put a leaf in front of them. it was Primus, super creative people, great references to pop culture. This is from a video shoot that they did. Remember those, were they Eveready commercials or Duracell commercials? Remember where they have these costumes? The same people built them these costumes as those commercials. This was one of Les's solo projects. This was a great idea that he's like, I want to be in a frame. And I came up with this idea to build put a frame on a piece of white seamless, and we cut it out and hung it and had him behind it. Another one of Les's solo project, that's the Frog Brigade, more Primus, and then the Primus book. The Flaming Lips, another band that I've done a lot of work with. This is my first shoot with them. This is in 1989. They were managed by a woman who lived here in San Francisco, and I'd never heard of them, and she said she needed a publicity shoot, little alternative punk rock band from Oklahoma. And so we did a bunch of shots of them, and then they came back a couple of months later because they had a new member of the band. And so this was right after the earthquake in '89 that we shot this second set of shots, October of '89. I think it was a week after that. And he's in the back. Michael, the bass player in the back, is reading Interview with a Vampire. And then I didn't see these guys for 4 or 5 years. And then I got assigned by Rolling Stone magazine to cover Lollapalooza when Lollapalooza was still a touring festival. And for not the first year of Lollapalooza, but the next 5 or 6 years, I went to the opening of Lollapalooza no matter where it was in the country for Rolling Stone magazine. And have any of you guys seen the Flaming Lips in the last couple of years? You know what their stage show is like? So this is their first thing, and that scaffolding in the back with that guy on it has a bubble machine on it, and that was their first stage prop. If you don't know what their stage shows look like now, go online and check it out. It's completely out of control, but this was sort of the beginning of all of that madness. And this is the shot that ran in Rolling Stone, and just one of those great shots. So you have Wayne. This is from the Soft Bulletin. I did the publicity photos for that. This is sort of what their new show looks like. Actually, their newest one's a little bit different, but they would bring up audience members to dance on stage. So this is just some random audience member. They would put them in costumes, and they have people on either side of the stage dancing. I brought my son and my daughter to the Yahoo Christmas party, 10 years ago, which was in the Flaming Lips played, and they were dancing on stage with animal masks on their head. This is at Bimbo's from Noise Pop a year or two ago when they played. And of course, so what did we do? We did a book on the Flaming Lips. Wayne, the singer's wife, actually not wife, they were never married. His girlfriend at the time was also a photographer, and I was sort of mentoring her, and so she had a lot of stuff, I had a lot of stuff, and we did this book. Again, this is a limited edition book. You can't really find it anymore. It was only available on the band's website and Warner Brothers website, and I think Amazon had it. But if you go on Amazon and look at it, it's got some glowing reviews, and I've seen them floating around for $500, $600, $700 now. Limited edition, signed and numbered by the band. So now we just get into a bunch of portraits that I did. This is the Indigo Girls, right when their very first record came out. Early Soundgarden. I don't know if you guys know this story, but this guy over here, Jason, he was in Nirvana and left Nirvana because he wanted to be a rock star, and Soundgarden was bigger than Nirvana at the time, and he joined Soundgarden. And then Soundgarden, then he left Soundgarden because he was so depressed, probably for leaving Nirvana, I don't know, that he eventually left the band. But there was a big article on him recently in the New York Times. I bet you can find it online. He joined the army and became a special, like a Army SEAL or something, super ranger dude, and kind of left rock and roll behind. Jason Everman is his name. So this is one of my early shoots with Soundgarden, and I did a whole bunch of stuff with them. Stone Temple Pilots, this was from a magazine story. Radiohead, when their first record came out, do you remember the first hit song, Creep? That's when this was taken. This was for Us magazine. We shot this in San Francisco at the Phoenix Hotel. And you can't even talk to these guys anymore. There's too many people protecting them. Then I shot them for Rolling Stone magazine. This is in the alleyway right behind Slim's. They were playing Slim's that night. After we did this photo shoot, they all came over to my studio, which at the time was at 9th and Folsom, to look at a bunch of photos I'd taken of them doing a free live concert. You probably don't know this, but Radiohead did a free live concert in San Francisco at Justin Herman Plaza in 1995. More shots. This is taken up with a 4x5 camera with Polaroid film, that has a negative also. 95 portrait. This is my next shoot, I think in 96. This was done for Addicted to Noise, which was the first online music magazine. Also at the Phoenix Hotel. This is REM. This is shot down at the Chateau Marmont down in Los Angeles. And it was a magazine cover for a German magazine. And I set this shot up right here for the cover. And Michael Stipe would not put his bag down for me. And I had a 20-minute slot, and I sat down and I shot my cover shot, and you can see this is a square format image. This is shot with the Hasselblad, which is what we used to shoot most of our magazine covers with. And I shot for like 4 or 5 minutes, was getting ready to move them to the next spot, and I turned to the publicist, I go, we're doing great, that was 5 minutes, we got 15 to go. And she looks at me, she goes, honey, that was 15 minutes, you have 5 minutes to go. You know, and it was like, whoa. So I just like went into high gear and did a quick available light shot facing the other direction, then moved him to a window for the last shot, and I was done. Another shot of the Indigo Girls for a cover of Acoustic Guitar magazine, also shot in the alleyway behind Slim's. I shot in every single back alley in San Francisco and every warehouse. And if you guys know the city at all or live in the city, the Dog Patch neighborhood was like my photo studio. There were so many great dilapidated warehouses, and I'd go do a photo shoot, come back, and the warehouse would be gone. So my whole stomping grounds. I don't know where all the young photographers are going to shoot all the cool bands now, because there ain't no places left. You got to go to Oakland. Soundgarden at Lollapalooza in '92. Same thing. This was shot for Rolling Stone magazine. Booker T and the MGs. Did Duck Dunn just die, did I hear? Yeah, the bass player. Blues Traveler, this was shot for their record 4. I did the CD packaging for that. It was on A&M. That was their big hit record, which I think they're doing a 25-year anniversary of it coming up next year. The worst CD package ever in the history of CD packages. Just terrible, 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 because the singer got in a big fight with the record company about how big the lyric should be, and they just kind of screwed him and just did a really bad job. I don't know if you guys remember the Squirrel Nut Zippers. I shot 2 albums for them. They were from North Carolina. Actually, I was nominated for a Grammy for one of these for CD packaging. The band Fish, shot down at Shoreline, right down the street here. The Donnas, they were a Palo Alto band, and they started out as young teenagers in high school, and we went to this abandoned high school in Palo Alto and shot them in the bathroom, because that's where bad girls in Palo Alto hang out, in the bathroom. The Talking Heads. So I'm a huge Talking Heads fan, always have been. In 1992, I went and saw the Talking Heads on the Stop Making Sense tour, which was the movie that Jonathan Demme, right? That's who directed that, right? Did. And this was taken for the 15th anniversary of that movie. They were doing a thing at the Castro Theater in San Francisco. But when I went and saw them in '92, I didn't have any money. I was in college, and tickets were like $12. And so we made counterfeit tickets. But back then, the way we did it is we Xeroxed them in black and white. They were theater tickets, not like Ticketron or Ticketmaster or whatever it is. They were like theater tickets. So we photocopied them in black and white, and then we watercolored them with watercolor paints, and then we glued a bunch of pieces of paper together until they were about the right thickness, and then perforated them with a pin, and it worked. We all got into the show, like 4 or 5 of us. We snuck in, and so when I did this shoot with these guys, David Byrne got there first, and these guys don't like each other, or at least Chris and Tina, who are husband and wife, never really got along with David. So they all got there separately. So David got there, and I told him the story about making the counterfeit ticket, and I go, so I guess I owe you $10, and I whip out $10 to give it to him. He's like, no, it's okay, dude. You don't have to pay me for the ticket. But I was, and this is the only band photo that has been taken of the Talking Heads since they broke up back in the early '90s, and it was all taken at the Miyako Hotel up in the city. This is from a photo shoot I did with a band called Lagwagon, a punk rock band out of San Francisco, great band, and these are all band members, and we dressed everybody up like they were from the '50s. The teacher, warning signs of communists, long hair on men, short hair on women. The gas station attendant, of course, the milkman, and Joey again, and the whole band. This picture has great meaning to me. This is the Doobie Brothers, and I did their publicity photos. This is my old studio on South of Market. The Doobie Brothers was my very, very first concert when I was in 9th grade in 1975. Halloween night, 1975, Madison Square Garden, I went and saw the Doobie Brothers. So when they had it in my studio, I was like, hey, you guys were my first concert. I had good taste in music back then, and still hopefully do. But, just one of those moments that you're with somebody that, you've been along that ride with for so long. Third Eye Blind. This is actually a still from a video we were shooting. I did a whole video. You can find it online on YouTube of all still photographs with this kind of setting, and it's all animated together. There's like 6,000 still photographs. The band Mo, Smash Mouth, who can't get arrested these days, but I shot all their early albums, and this is a publicity shoot that we just did a few years ago. Turtle Island String Quartet, this was done for them. This is Further, the guys from the Grateful Dead, Phil Lesh and Bob Weir. So, here I was, 16, 17-year-old deadhead in New Jersey, and 30 years later, I'm doing their band publicity photos. That's the drummer from the Grateful Dead in a band that he had called the Seven Walkers, Blame Sally, band called ALO. I shot a couple albums for them, Bay Area band, them again, Yonder Mountain String Band. This is shot up in the Marin Headlands. Trigger Hippie with Joan Osborne, shot in Golden Gate Park. Mumford & Sons, this was shot down in Monterey 2 years ago, I guess it was, when they played that festival down there, and this was for the cover of Acoustic Guitar Magazine. And what was so great about that is that night they were doing like some sort of John Steinbeck thing at some theater in Monterey, and they were playing a Bruce Springsteen song, The Ghost of Tom Joad, and they basically, during my photo shoot, they rehearsed it for like 15 minutes while I was just shooting them. They just went over and over, and you can't see it, but my iPhone is like right here. I photoshopped it out. And they're like reading the lyrics off of my phone that was in that shot while they were doing it. And I was like, that's great, because I wanted pictures of them playing anyway. Band called Materialize. This is a cemetery up in Oakland that I love to shoot in. Just such a great old cemetery. I've shot a lot of bands there. I asked permission once. I was shooting the band Cake there, and we went and talked to the cemetery director, and he was like the creepiest guy ever. Like, I swear to God, like when we left, we were like saying he's got like women locked up in some of these tomb-like things. Like, it was that creepy. Tim and Nikki Bloom and the Gramblers and the Mother Hips. Good friends of mine I've done a lot of work with. I just did this with them not too long ago for Yamaha guitars. This is like a Yamaha guitar marketing piece. Huey Lewis and the News. You guys know the 1982 record Sports. 30 years ago, this is a reproduction that we did of this last year. So we went back to the same bar in Mill Valley, and I actually should have put the original cover in so you could see it. So we recreated that album cover. Go up and look at it online. You can see the comparison between the two, but fun shoot. Tea Leaf Green, shot in Alameda for their new record. The Deadly Gentlemen, a bluegrass band. The Shook Twins from Portland. This is something I just shot. So this is real contemporary work. I think that as a photographer, it's so important to stay relevant. I've been doing this a really long time, and I know a lot of photographers that are my age that have been doing it for a long time. They don't shoot anymore. And I think that for me, it's always been important to remain relevant and not be a relic, and to be able to keep shooting. And I feel like work like this, I love this photograph. I think that it's, I think personally, I just think it's a stunning photograph of two stunning women that are twin sisters. But I'm still trying to, continue to reinvent myself as a photographer in the digital world, because I went from, very analog to very digital. Neil Young, another one of my favorite subjects. This was shot for the cover of Pulse magazine, which was Tower Pulse when Tower Records was around. And this was shot a couple of days after Bill Graham died in the helicopter crash, and a couple of days before they did the big memorial show for him in the park. And I have a lot of Neil in here. Neil is a very, 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 very intense person. If you've ever been around Neil, you know that, he is the epitome of, mad genius. And I was told that I was going to have 10 minutes to photograph him for this cover, and he was telling me my 10 minutes was up. And so it's pretty funny. So we shot him in the train room. He lives down here in Woodside, and he has this room that, he was part owner of Lionel Trains for a while. I don't know if he still is. And he had a train room, and it was just this giant room, probably twice the size of this room, with this giant train track and these ceilings that were painted with clouds and mountains, and it was just this incredible thing. And we found this little corner that hadn't been painted yet. We shot him there for the cover. And then I convinced him to go outside and do one other shot with me outside. It's from the same shoot. And then we were done. This is from another shoot that I did for another magazine, Musician Magazine. Do you guys know what the Mountain Home is up on Skyline Boulevard? It's a restaurant up there. So he was doing a bunch of press for, all sorts of stuff, and I was told to be there at a certain time. I'm tooling down Skyline Boulevard at 50 miles an hour, and all of a sudden the Mountain Home comes up, and I hit the brakes and pull into the parking lot, and it's all gravel, and I'm screeching and skidding, and he's doing a video interview with Kurt Loder from MTV. And the producer guy comes running over, and he's like, shh, I'm like, okay, dude, whatever, I'm here, I stopped. And so they finished their interview, and again, I'm told I have 10 minutes to photograph Neil. So I sit him down, and this is still shooting film, and I shoot a picture with a Polaroid back, which tests your lighting, and it takes 90 seconds to develop, right? So I pull the Polaroid, Kurt Loder comes back and starts talking to Neil. 10 minutes goes by, and I'm like waiting. The publicist comes back and goes, okay, you're done. I'm like, I only shot a Polaroid. That's it. I'm not done. He's like, and he looks at Kurt and he goes, Kurt, get out of here. Neil, sit down. And I shot for my 10 minutes. And I did 3 setups. This was the last one. This is shot with a high contrast, high grain, black and white Polaroid film called Polograph. And it has 12 frames on the roll. And it's so sensitive to light that you have to bracket. And you usually only get 3 frames that are correctly exposed out of the roll. That's one of the portraits from that shoot where he was sitting down. This is a shoot I did for Esquire magazine. This is backstage at Shoreline Amphitheater during one of the Bridge School benefits. Another one of those things where I literally had 5 minutes. And that's the guitar case that was given to him by Hank Williams' granddaughter. And he has Hank Williams' guitar. And his guitar tech told me where the guitar was in this trunk in this big truck. And I had my son with me at the time who was probably, I don't know, 11 or 12. And so I told Sam, my son, go get that guitar case that I showed you. He comes walking out with Neil's Hank Williams guitar, and Neil looks at him and goes, I'll take that. You know, pretty classic moment. But I love working with Neil, and you know, one of these days I'll do a book on him, but I think I have to wait until a little bit further along. This is my most recent portrait that I did of Neil. I was asked to do a visa photo for him because he was traveling to Brazil a couple years ago because Neil can't just walk into Walgreens and do a visa photo. And so I did it for him, his manager, and 2 crew guys that were going with him. And so we set up backstage at Shoreline at the Bridge School. And you're not allowed to wear a hat for a visa photo, and he didn't shave, and you're supposed to be straight onto the camera with all these things. So I did, you know, and he sat for me for about literally maybe 60 seconds. He's like, you got it, you got it. I'm like, one more. He goes, okay, and he grabs his hat and looks at me, and I take 1 shot, and he gets up and walks away, and that was the shot. So that's the only one without, that's not the visa photo, but I love that picture. Ken Kesey. So this is a section on photographs of people that I've shot that are not musicians. Ken Kesey wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Sometimes a Great Notion, Merry Pranksters, Acid Tests with the Grateful Dead, etc. Anybody know who Anton Lavey is? The Church of Satan. You guys ever hear of the Church of Satan? Look it up on Wikipedia. And this was shot in his basement in San Francisco. Very interesting. This room here was called the Den of Iniquity. And the Church of Satan was basically all about sex. As you can see, the mannequin Cub Scout with the erection and the drunk woman passed out. And it's a whole thing. Anton Lavey with his pentagram. This was a fashion shoot, by the way, that we did with him for the Nose magazine, which was sort of like The Onion in print. Allen Ginsberg, the poet, the beat poet. Lemony Snicket, Daniel Handler. This was shot at the Palace of Legion of Honor up in San Francisco. It's a 4x5 Polaroid. Shaquille O'Neal did this in LA. He was making one of those bad movies that he made. And he had a giant penthouse with no furniture in it. There was he didn't really live there. He was just staying there during the filming. And he had this, you know, the big Superman ring. It doesn't look that big, but when I put it on my fingers, I think it covered 3 of my fingers. So Latrell Sprewell, remember when he was on the Golden State Warriors and he choked the coach? I shot this for the Source magazine at that time. So, Bill Clinton, he was still president. This was at the Presidio in San Francisco. And they were turning the Presidio over to the city of San Francisco. And, you know, there was governors and senators. And I was shooting for the GGNRA, which is not the National Rifle Association, which is the Golden Gate National Recreation Area. And I needed to be on the beach when he was walking on the beach with the GGNRA director. And they only let 1 photographer up there, the pool photographer from Time Magazine or whatever. And I'm like talking to my ranger contact who's talking to the Secret Service. And they finally let me on the beach and I make it like 4 steps and I'm in a headlock by the Secret Service. Okay. And so anyway, I got the shot and survived that one. I'm going to go fast because I think I only have about 10 minutes and then we're going to go into question and answers. Is that correct? Okay. Oh, wow. Time is flying. These are a bunch of ads that we shot for different, you know, publications or different ad companies. This was great. We got to rent an elephant. Steve Ballmer. You guys know who Steve Ballmer is, right? Okay. I was doing a lot of stuff, but then I was asked to photograph in 1995 a little company called Yahoo. They had just incorporated a few months before that. And this is Philo and Yang in their office at Yahoo in 1995. They had 20 employees. This was shot for Rolling Stone magazine. That is their entire data center, okay? So then a couple years later, October of '99, I was hired by Fortune magazine to shoot a brand new company called Google. There were 80 employees here. We shot Sergey and Larry, and then We shot them in front of the company car. Okay, there were no jets, but we did shoot them in front of, that was the Google car. And that was in '99. This is Carlos Santana, the back cover of Supernatural. And again, you know, Carlos is someone that I've done a lot of work with over the years. And one of these days I'll do a big book on Carlos, but not quite yet. This was just taken at Jazz Fest just a few weeks ago or 2 weeks ago. John Fogerty for Rolling Stone magazine. He was on trial for plagiarizing his own music. Shot for Rolling Stone magazine. This is a band called the -5, which is the guys from REM, and the art director said, bring your axes, bring your guitar, bring your axes. So they brought their axes. And B.B. King, this was shot for the cover of Fretboard magazine. B.B. wanted me to shoot him in this little back area of his bus, and I was like, no way. So I convinced him. When he came off stage, I had a room at the Paramount Theater in Oakland, and I dragged him into this room very quickly. I'm going to try and, Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys. It's a great story, but I'm not going to tell it because we don't have time. David Byrne, another one. He came to my studio for a photo shoot. This was also for Addicted to Noise. And he rode up on his bicycle, his bike helmet, and he rang the doorbell, and my assistant at the time thought he was a bike messenger and handed him a package. He said, no, I'm David. I'm here for a photo shoot. But, you know, Dr. Dre, this was right after he left Death Row Records, and there was a hit put out on it by Suge Knight. And, you know, he had 20 guys surrounding him everywhere he went, and he didn't like the wardrobe that we had picked out. So he disappeared with his entourage for 3 hours to go up to Melrose. This is after actually me flying to LA the night before and him canceling the shoot because he was too tired from an all-night session. He came the next day. They went shopping on Melrose for 4 hours and got a black t-shirt, which we had 9 of. And so we shot him, you know. This is when some art director at the Source magazine decided that the nice white Jewish kid should be the next cool hip-hop photographer and shoot covers for the Source. Perry Farrell from Jane's Addiction. This is from a BAM magazine cover with his then wife. They were editing a concert film in their hotel room, and more Jane's Addiction. This is me first in the Gimme Gimmes, which is a San Francisco punk rock supergroup. And I've shot a bunch of album covers for. That's the most recent album cover that just came out in the last couple of weeks. It's called Divas. Michael Hedges, which is another great story. If you know who Michael Hedges is, an incredible guitar player who's known for his incredible guitar playing and his long flowing hair. I did 2 photo shoots with him 6 years apart, and both shoots he shaved his head 3 days before the shoot. And he died in a horrible motorcycle accident riding home to Monterey. Alkaline Trio shot in that same cemetery, and of course we came by a grave that they were just digging, so I jumped down in the grave to photograph them. Roger Mcguinn from the Byrds. I shot this in high school, April 14th, 1979, and just by chance, April 14th, 2004, he was in my studio shooting it for a magazine cover, so 25 years to the day. I was anal back when I was a kid. I kept track of the exact date of everything I shot, which is so important. I know so many photographers that don't do that. Aaron Neville from the Neville Brothers down in New Orleans. We shot, you know, a bunch of album covers for him for his gospel records. The Bare Naked Ladies became good friends of mine. This is the shoot that we did for their record Stunt. And this is Kevin, the keyboard player, who had been feeling sick with the flu for about 2 weeks leading up to this photo shoot. He got out of when he was getting off the plane, something fell out of the overhead, hit him in the head, and he was gushing with blood. And you know how head wounds, you bleed a lot anyway. We did the photo shoot. He was really exhausted and really wasn't feeling well. He flew back to Toronto the next day, and they diagnosed him with leukemia and said he had 6 months to live. This was in 1999. He's still alive today, which is pretty remarkable. That's the shot that's on the album, on the CD. Tom Waits. All right, we have time for one good Tom Waits story. This isn't the first time that I shot Waits, which was in August of '92 for the Bone Machine record. And I'm not going to tell this story. I'm going to tell the next story. So the next time I was asked to photograph Tom Waits was in 1999. And we went back up to the same place. This is a recording studio called Prairie Sun up in Cotati where he records his records. And it's it's a chicken farm. There's chickens running around everywhere, and there's old abandoned motorcycles and claw tub bathtubs. And I would walk around and I said, you know, I said, there's old wrought iron furniture. And I sat Tom down and I said, let's shoot the cover here on this. He goes, Jay, this furniture looks like it could be my grandmother's. He's like, Tom, right? You know, so I brought him over to the motorcycle, and he wouldn't let me, you know, brought him to the clawfoot bathtub. He wouldn't let me shoot him there. Go to the motorcycle. I'm freaking out because I only have like 30 minutes to do the shoot. He's like, no, I don't like this. And then I bring him to this spot here, and I say, let me do a shot of you sitting down. He's like, no, let's do it standing up. I go, let's do a Polaroid, standing up or sitting down. I show him the Polaroid standing up. He goes, Jay, you're right. Looks better sitting down, but just watch my chin. So then finally he goes, I got an idea. Let's jump in my car and go just 2 miles down the road, because there's this old abandoned car that I saw, and we'll take some photographs there. So we jump in his car, and he's looking at me. He goes, do you remember the old Woody Woodpecker thing from the 60s? He's like, you know, making that face at me, right? I'm like, yeah. So it's just me and him in the car, and he's like, it's just 3 minutes down the road. Well, we went from Katati to Petaluma, which took 30 minutes to get there. So we're driving down all these back roads. He's like, Jay, I think we're going to run out of gas, right? And I'm like I'm thinking, okay, well, that's great. Let's stop and get gas. I'll take pictures of you pumping gas. There ain't no gas stations between here and Petaluma. So we get down there, and he gets out of the car, his truck, and he goes, I don't know whose house this is, and I don't know whose car that is, but you better go and ask and see if we can take pictures there. So I go up and ring the doorbell. Nobody answers. Finally, we're walking up the driveway, and this little old lady comes out, and I say, hey, can I take some photographs in the car in the back? And she goes, car? It's got no wheels. I'm like, no. And I've got like 3 cameras around my neck, because when we left the chicken ranch, I didn't bring any equipment, no lighting equipment, just all my cameras. I look like Dennis Hopper in Apocalypse Now, right? And so I have all these cameras around my neck, and I go, no, we don't want to drive the car. We want to just take a photograph of my friend Tom here. She goes, car hasn't driven since my husband died in 62, you know? And like, I mean, is this like Tom Waits' like everyday life? And she's got like a scarf wrapped around her head and this long trench coat, you know? And so finally I go, can I give you $25? I write it on a piece of paper. I will give you $25 to use the car. And I showed her. She's like, I don't want your money, right? So we hop over the fence, and we shoot all these photos. And Tom's pretending that he's a used car salesman. And then he says, take a picture of me by the grill, because it looks like my face. You know, so we're shooting all these pictures of him down there. And this whole thing, you know, here he is. You want to buy a car? You know, doing all this stuff with Tom, right? And then he goes, okay, I got to go. I'm like, no, wait, one more roll. And I break out my toy plastic camera that's in the Google colors. Ever seen like a little, what are those things called? What's that? Lego? No, not a Lego. I'll think about it. It's a Lomo type camera. Anyway, it's green and yellow and red and blue, and it's plastic, and it has a lens that spins, and you get 4 frames at once, right? And it's plastic, and it's out of focus. And so I'm like shooting Tom with the plastic camera, and he's hanging out, and then he goes, okay, I gotta go. And he jumps over the barbed wire cow fence and starts running down the driveway, and I'm chasing after him with a 1960s Polaroid, you know, shooting him, running, and pulling Polaroids and dropping him on the driveway. And he gets to the car, and he looks at me and he goes, okay, see you later. And he drives away. And we were being followed by my assistant in the publicist's car, so there was another car there. And he just drives away. And I'm like, okay. And we get back in the car, drive up to Katati, get all of our stuff, and we just left scattered everywhere on the property, 4x5 camera, lighting equipment, everything, and packed up. And that was the end of my shoot with Tom Waits. So let's see. And there's one of the Polaroids, one of the last Polaroids. It's a Polaroid that had a negative also. Ben Harper. Jared, are we done? Yeah. Dave Matthews. You know what? I'm going to go fast. Boz Skaggs, Emmylou Harris, George Clinton, James Brown, Johnny Cash and June Cash, Joni Mitchell, Josh Groban. I shot his first album cover. That's the cover, although they used it in black and white. Susie Sue from Susie and the Banshees. Snoop smoking pot. Snoop passed out in the middle of his photo shoot, and he goes, hey man, I'm known for passing out in my photo shoots. Steve Miller, Tori Amos, her first magazine cover of Keyboard magazine. Chris Isaak, Waylon Jennings, Jello Biafra, the Neville brothers down in New Orleans. Gil Scott Heron, Ike Turner as an Ike and Tina. J.J. Cale, who just died last year. Country Joe McDonald, Fiona Apple, who's as depressed as her picture looks. Jamie Foxx, the actor. I shot his first album cover. Okay? And after the shoot was over, we were talking about ping pong. He's like, I got a ping pong table at my house. Let's go play ping pong. So we go to his house. He's in the flatlands of Hollywood before he was a big, and I'm pretty good at ping pong. Like I can hold my own. And he destroyed me. He was like Olympic level ping pong player. But shot Jamie's first album, you know. Isaac Hayes, Michael Penn, Bob Mould. This was done in 1990, and I just did Bob Mould's new album 3 months ago, 25 years later. Chris Whitley, John Lee Hooker, Yorma, Taj Mahal, that's for an album cover. And then I did a book called Traveling on a High Frequency, which is also out here, which was all this stuff that you just saw. Some new work that I've been recently, this is all digital work, Peter Rowan. We're almost done, we've only got a few more to go. Eddie Money, Chris Robinson, that was a magazine cover. Elvis Costello at Hardly Strictly Bluegrass. Emmylou Harris, Jackie Green, Ramblin' Jack Elliott, Essence, Josh Redman shot his last record. Phil Lesh from the Grateful Dead. And that's the cover of my new book, Jam, which is all the live stuff, which is available for sale out here, and that's all live concert photography. All right, I think we're going to go into some questions here. You know, Allman Brothers and Carlos, Elvis Costello, Government Mule, Jackie Green, Jane's Addiction. This is all stuff that's in my new Jam book. I really wanted to do a book. I'm going to tell one more fun story because this is a good one. So this was shot at the Bridge School benefit. This is Eddie Vedder and Neil Young at the Bridge School. Epic photograph, right? Rolling Stone ran it full page. When you open the magazine, it was the first photo. They took where it said Bridge School and they put their little circle there and wrote RS with the issue number that they do. So the next year, I'm back at the Bridge School, and I've been shooting the Bridge School for 25 years for Neil and Teggy. And I walk up to Eddie and I introduce myself, and I say, hey, I'm the guy that took that picture of you and Neil that was in Rolling Stone. He goes, oh, I love that picture. Can I get a copy? I go, yeah. He goes, but I got to tell you a story. You know that scarf that I'm wearing in that? He goes, you know the actor Bradley Cooper? I'm like, well, I know who he is. Like, I'm not hanging out with Bradley Cooper. He goes, well, Bradley Cooper called me up and needed a favor. He needed me to like autograph some things for some friend of his or relative or whatever. And I'm like, sure, no problem. So Eddie autographs some CDs or prints, whatever it was, sends them to Bradley Cooper. And in exchange, Bradley Cooper sends him the scarf, right, as a thank you. So then this shot is in Rolling Stone, and Bradley Cooper sees it and calls Eddie and goes, I really miss that scarf. Can I have it back? And Eddie was like, fuck no! So Eddie told me that story, which was a great story. Neil Young from his last Electric tour, Fish at Red Rocks, String Cheese at Red Rocks, Spearhead, another one of my favorite bands. I've been working with Michael Franti and Spearhead since the late 80s. I do a lot of video. The Roots, Kirk from The Roots has become a good friend. My Morning Jacket, who's on the cover of the new book. Black Keys, before anybody really knew them, playing at a small festival on the East Coast. This is Mo at Red Rocks. Go-Go Bordello. And I think we're just about done. I got like 5 more, Grace Potter, Lucas Nelson, the Avett Brothers at Mountain Jam. And then I got a lot of crowd shots in there, and that's because I'm going to do my next book, which is going to come out in 2015, and that's going to be called Hippie Chick. And it's going to be exactly what you think it is, hippie chicks. And what a long, strange trip it continues to be. Thank you very much. Do we have time for a couple of questions?
Yeah, I think
okay.
Hi, do you have any stories about the 70s scene of like Jackson Browne and Tom Petty and
Not really, because I was
area?
still in high school in the 70s, and so, I mean, I've been face-to-face with those guys, and Jackson, I love Jackson, and I photographed him many times over the years, but not really from the 70s. I was still a kid with a camera trying to figure out my place in the script.
What's your favorite venue to shoot in? And then also, what musician have you seen evolve the most over the years that you've been able to shoot?
You know, I like shooting in smaller, like as far as festivals go, I like smaller festivals. I like Mountain Jam and Summer Camp and Modown and Gathering the Vibes. And these are East Coast festivals. Like, I don't love big, 90 bands over 17 stages. There's like, like a jazz fest where I was last week. When Carlos Santana was playing, I was on stage shooting him. I do a lot of work with him. And I stayed for the whole set. And most people that are at Jazz Fest that are shooting, it's 15 minutes here, it's 15 minutes here, it's 15 minutes here, it's 15. I don't like that. I like to... Like, the way you get the epic photograph is you wait for the photograph. It just doesn't happen in the first 15 minutes. And so, on the festival side, I like smaller festivals, and I like to be able to concentrate on staying in one place as long as possible. Venue-wise, I mean, I love all the sound. I love Slim's and the Great American Music Hall and the Fillmore and the Warfield and the Fox and, all the Terrapin Crossroads. I love shooting at Terrapin Crossroads and the Sweetwater. I mean, there's so many great venues in the Bay Area. I like venues with low stages, and that's why I like shooting on stage a lot, and I've kind of earned or gotten to the point where I'm allowed to be on stage a lot. And so, because you can see people's feet. When you're on a high stage and you're shooting, you see them from here up, and it's a different look. And so I like being on stage, or I like shooting in rooms that have low stages where if I'm standing in front of it, like, I can see everything. So what musician have I seen develop the most? So many. I mean, Primus, Michael Franti and Spearhead, I think those are people that have, when Spearhead first started, they were considered more of a hip hop group, and Primus was considered a heavy metal band, and now they're both darlings of the jam band world, because I think that fans in the jam band world are way more open-minded than most other musical fans. And then really, if you look at look at all the punk rock that was happening in the late 70s and stuff like that, a lot of that stuff is gone and disappeared. But look at bands like, Mo and Fish that are 25 and 30 years into their career, and they're still vibrant bands, And so even like Michael Franti and Spearhead, I first photographed him, I think in 87 or 88, So, long careers that have evolved into being who these people are.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you have a favorite perspective, because I saw you shot like a lot of fisheye.
So back in the day, I did love the fisheye lens, and I don't have a fisheye, I do have a fisheye lens, but I never bring it with me. I shoot with a wide lens. I have a 14-24 Nikon, which I love and adore. So it is a very wide lens, but it's rectangular. It's not curved at all, although it does stretch people out on the ends and makes people look fat. But I've always been like my style, and so when you're a photographer, you're sort of defined by your style. At least you should be defined by your style. And I think a lot of people don't have a style because they don't really understand what they're doing, and they picked up a digital camera and they're just shooting. And so, people used to tell me all the time they could tell my work because I always shot very wide. And so even my live stuff, like I know some photographers that like to be far back and shoot with long lenses to get that compression, but I like to be right up front, like always with a 24 millimeter lens, or now my 14. When I was shooting prime lenses, Nikon film, I think my widest lens was a 20. Well, I had the 16 millimeter fisheye, but I would much prefer to be right in your face shooting than back. It's just the style that I liked and that I gravitated to. So
how many photos do you typically take at a show, and how many of those are, the
deleted?
quality that you would give to, or the reverse deleted?
So I'm a heavy shooter, and I always have been. Even when I shot film, I shot way more film than everybody else, because I always truly believe that if you're in front of Jerry Garcia and it's, September 1st, 1985, you're never going to be at September 1st, 1985 again. So I've shot a lot of film, and digital I even shoot more. Like a typical show, especially if I'm shooting the whole set, like Santana at Jazz Fest, I think I did 2,500 images in 90 minutes or something like that. And that's pretty typical for me to shoot about 2,500 images. I typically delete 50% of what I shoot, like pretty consistently. I look at every single photo that I shoot. I have a full-time guy that works for me that handles all my digital IT and all my maintenance and retouching and stuff like that. And so our workflow is it all goes into his system, and then I come in and then I edit it. And it's sort of like if I work in Lightroom, so it's a delete or a keep. And if I'm keeping it, I'm 1-starring it or 2-starring it, or I'm rating it so I can come back to it. But I might, deliver to a client. Like if I'm shooting a band, like a publicity shoot, I might try and get it down to 200 or 300 out of, like, let's say 1,000 that I might end up keeping, or 800 that I'm keeping that I'll deliver to the client as a web link for them to look at.
So I love the old pictures of the hippies at the Dead shows because I see my old friends in them. And I was wondering if there's any way you could just dump a huge library on the internet somewhere.
Well, go to my Facebook page. There's hundreds of them. J. Blakesberg Photography.
Since you started in film, obviously, how do you feel about having to transition to digital with your workflow? Do you feel like it's affected your personal style or improved it?
So when the transition, so I was actually a pretty early adapter to digital. Early on, we shot film, but I invested in scanning technology, like some of the early scanners. And we would deliver our jobs digitally to our clients. And it was actually, from a business standpoint, it was also good because it generated a lot of revenue, because at that time, clients were still like, yeah, we'll pay for scanning, of course. We used to pay for prints, now we'll pay for scanning, and we skip this, we don't have to pay for prints and then get those scanned. And so I've scanned over 85,000 pieces of film of mine that I shot. I've probably shot over 1 million images on film. I've got over 1 million images in my digital archive. And so when I first started shooting with digital, I hated it. I hated the look. It was also really one of the reasons why I stopped. I never really wanted to get into video. I do a lot of video directing now because the technology has changed to the point where the look and feel of it creatively looks a lot like film, right? 24 frames per second, stuff like that. And so, early digital photography looked like bad video from the 80s, bad soap opera video, you know what I mean? It had that look. It was very sterile. It was very pixel. And, and all the camera manufacturers be like, you got to shoot digital. Look at how sharp this is. Look at how many pixels there are, and I'm like, that's not, when I used to shoot film, I'd go out and shoot, and I'd shoot color, I'd shoot black and white, I'd shoot fast film, slow film, grainy film, and because that was sort of what made the style. Large format, medium format, small format, it was all those things in the palette that helped us create it. So all of a sudden, you get a digital camera, and everybody's taking pictures, and it comes out of the camera looking the same. All of our pictures are looking the same. So I, early on, spent, pre-Instagram filter land, spent, months and months and months with my IT digital retoucher guy, developing like custom filters that we created to kind of make my digital photos look like film. And if you looked at it was maybe hard to see on the screen, but a lot of those images that are shot digitally, we would add grain and noise and contrast and over sharpening and all these different filters. And we played around with it for months and months until we kind of came up with a formula. And so until I kind of came up with that look, and if you pick up the book Jam outside and look at it, you'll see it in those pictures because they jump out at you. That's kind of how I got to the point where creatively I was like, okay, I like this. And it was also the digital cameras getting bigger files, full-size chip cameras made a difference. And so we were, like I said, we were early adapters to digital, slow adapters to using digital cameras because I didn't like it. And I was a Nikon guy. Canon was ahead of Nikon, and the early Nikon cameras were all small chip cameras, and I hated the way it looked. Like realistically, some of the first photos I took digitally on those early cameras, they're like, I kind of equate them to like Instamatic photos from the 70s. Like that's how bad they are. Like, they're garbage, really. They're 2, 3, 4 megabyte photos that we didn't shoot raw, or if we did, they're just bad, and we've lost digital files in the transition and the migration and whatnot, But I like where I'm at now digitally, and I think, if you saw some of the recent work that I was showing, you kind of see where my style has gone, and it doesn't look like it's cookie cutter and off the shelf and what everybody else does. And I think that, it also has inspired a lot of other photographers that do music that know me and know my work to try and, go down that same road.
Great. Well, thank you very, very much, Jay.
Thanks, Jared, for hosting me today. Jared Kelly from Google, you guys.